Welcome to This Is His Story podcast. Ministries and God's stories you need to know.
Hello, and welcome to the This Is His Story podcast, where today we're going to talk about the world's largest family, which is located in Kenya, Africa. And today I've got my son, Xander Turner, with us to have this discussion.
Hello, happy to be here.
All right. So the world's largest family, you can learn about it by watching a documentary called Mulli. And I believe there's a book called Father to the Fatherless. That is where you need to go to see the Genesis. But today we're going to quickly go through the Genesis and talk about how it started, but then how it's grown. It's a lot bigger story than just saving kids off the street and adopting them to a family, though that in itself is a pretty amazing story. So I just got back from a trip to Kenya to go visit this organization. And, Xander, when you think about the world's largest family, I mean, you haven't been there. Does it just conjure up the thought of one giant house with a bunch of kids? Like, what does that mean to you when you hear the phrase world's largest family?
Yeah, I don't know if I think of it as an orphanage or just like a household or just a bunch of kids running around with one dad. Is it just one person looking after them?
Like, yeah, it begs a lot of questions, doesn't it? Okay, so here's how this worked. I'm going to give the quick, I don't think this runs watching the movie in any way because the movie is a lot more complex and very well done, quite frankly. It's a really nice Hollywood adaptation of the story of Charles Mully and his wife, Esther. But basically, Charles Mully was an orphan himself, and he was born into a family. But something that's very common in rural Kenya, and I would say in rural third world country, it can't feed a kid. What do? Like if you have multiple kids, you can't feed them, then sometimes kids get abandoned, right? Well, he was abandoned by his family. I think he sort of woke up one day and they were gone. And what happens is when you're abandoned, of course, you go to your neighbors or any relatives you have, and if they can't feed you, they can't feed you. And so he made the long walk to Nairobi because as what happens is you think, oh, there's no money out here. The resources are low. There's no water. There's no food. There's no job opportunities. I'm going to go to the big city. Well, Xander, what happens when you go to Nairobi is you and hundreds of thousands of other people made the same journey wishing for a better life, and they can't find it because there's so many people in this crowded city that they have a giant slum, okay? So even today, the slum has anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million. There's been various counts. And I don't know if Charles lived in the slum. He got a job pretty quick working for a lady. And he just hustled his way up the ladder, and he ended up buying with his extra money. He bought a bus or a car, and he created a company called Mulli Ways. Taxi services work a little different there than they do here, but and a lot of other countries that Americans have a hard time understanding because we put everything with our lens on it. But it's a car that gets you around, and they may have routes and people jump on them. The same car comes by every day and you jump on to go to your work. But he ended up making a lot of money with owning Mulli Ways. And then he ended up and multiple kids. And so what happened one day is that some street kids came up to try to mess with his car, vandalize or ask for money. And it really frustrated him. And I think the Lord laid it on his heart like, hey, that's you. That's you that I pulled out of that situation, and why are you upset with them? Like, you should be helping them. And so he went home and talked to Esther, and he just said, hey, I don't know if I want to work for money again. I'm done searching for that, and I'm going to go and start bringing some kids home, and let's see if we can help these kids. So he did. He went and grabbed a kid off the street, and he brought him home. Now, I don't remember whether he has 4 or 6 biological kids, somewhere in there. But what he did is he brought a kid home, and then I think the next day he went and grabbed another one, and then another one, and then another one. And to your point, it's not an orphanage. He didn't go grab them temporarily to save them. He grabbed them and said, I'm going to raise you. He's going to invest into these kids. So it's not a temporary deal where he hands them off or he saves them and then he goes and drops them off on an orphanage doorstep. He's not the middleman. He said, I'm going to solve the problem myself. So that was probably 30, 35 years ago. As of this moment, he has under his care of Mulli Children's Family, that's what he named the family, he has around 4,000 kids right now. But over the course of time, he's had somewhere between 20, 25, I've heard 30. I don't think they have perfect records. They're just existing. It's not like they're making a library out of it with all these names.
Yeah, that's a lot of kids. To my understanding, yes, he saves children. He becomes their father. But from what I can tell from what you've told me, it's more than just that as a ministry now. Like, it's kind of expanded where they have like a women's ministry.
Yes.
Elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I will. So what's happened? Well, before I get there, I think I need to go a little bit further on the journey. So think about the complexities of becoming a successful ministry. Now people are knocking on your doors. They're trying to drop their kids off, or a brother gets saved, and 3 years later, the sister now needs help. And so then what do we do with her? And so we had to decide, like, how many kids can I take in? What am I going to do with it? And not every kid that needs help can move into their house. And so what's happened is he now has sort of multiple locations, and he's grown because he's tried to solve the problem of why are there so many kids that need help, and what can I do about it? So to your point, what has happened over the last 30 years, and I do not know the timeline, but in his desire to love on the kids, he's also had to love on the neighbors and love on the community, and he wants to show the kids that's what you're supposed to do. So what he does is, like, he created a women's center, because what he thought is, if I can keep kids from needing help by having a mother that provides for them, because listen, AIDS runs rampant, prostitution, drug use, crime, there's so many things. And when you only make a couple dollars a day, which I think most Kenyans only make a couple of dollars a day, that's the average minimum wage. Prostitution, you can make $10, $5 a trick. So you can make good money being a prostitute. And then of course that leads to AIDS, it leads to a lot of other things. Then you have abandoned kids that are sitting there unparented and unloved, unnurtured. So he and his wife Esther decided to create this women's center where they find out about women who are in dire need. Some are mothers, some are not. They bring them in to their, I'm going to use the word compound. That's not the right word, but they are protected. That's a fact. And they invest in them. They love on them. They teach them a trait.
Is that a long-term thing? Is that like a program, or like that for years? What is that?
Yeah, you know what? It's a great question. I asked the exact same question. Here's the deal. They've done this long enough that they know where the problem spots are. So they realize it's not a 3-month program. Some of these women have been through some tough stuff. Just while I was there, one of them lost their baby, and another woman got pulled in because her granddad had raped her, and then she was having a baby with her granddad. And they pulled her out of that situation into this. Well, they're not just going to say, okay, start taking classes tomorrow and learn how to sew, and we're going to put you back on the street in 3 months. They said it may take 6 months for a year for that woman to ever trust anybody. And so it's just like, here's your bed, here's where we eat. When you're ready, we'll talk. And they do the same thing with the kids, by the way. They've learned the same lesson. If you go grab a street kid who's just trying to survive and you just tell him, hey, we love you, he doesn't just open his heart up that night and just say, oh, I'm safe, which we wish they would do, because that's what movies do. They wrap things up in pretty bows, and Disney wraps up things pretty. No, it's rough. It's tough. These kids have been abused, sexually abused, taken care of. They've been hungry. They've had to steal. They've had to do whatever. They're rough. And the women are too. They've been hurt. And so they bring them in and say, here's your bed. And we eat at these times. And they don't make them start school till they're ready. They don't even have a time that says it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's when you're ready. And they said every case is different.
Yeah. This is kind of changing the subject where you said school. I'm guessing that they provide their own school, like that's
They
Mulli
100%.
family school. It's not like part of Kenya.
Yeah, you'd have to have but they're under Kenya laws. We'll talk about that in a minute because their school system has a unique thing in it, which is very interesting. We'll hold that thought. Let's stay on the women for a minute. So the women come in, and I think maybe when they're ready to leave is when they leave. Or I don't know. I don't think there's a rule that whether you're there 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. The answer is when you're ready, it's time to go. And I think the women, this may not be true because some of them it may not be safe for them to go back where they were, but the kids for sure, they want them to go back to the same neighborhoods and communities that they came from because they want them to be salt and light in those communities. Now, what happens is by the time a lot of people turn 18, the kids, they actually stay around and work now as workers with the family because the family needs tons of workers, right? You can't it takes a village. It takes a village to raise one kid. Imagine what it takes to raise 4,000 kids.
Yeah.
But a lot of them come back and they're sort of shepherds, mentors, teachers, whatever. And they, if they go up to college or whatever, they even may still come back after college just to hang around for a while because it's a family.
Yeah.
But they get paid because they're like, hey, we need you to teach 7th grade or whatever. So let's go to your question about school. So Kenya is unique. Maybe not unique to other countries in Africa, but definitely it's unique compared to what we do in the States. When you're a certain age, you take a test. And I'm going to pretend it's like 8th grade, even though they don't do it like we do. I don't even know if they say 8th grade.
Just around the middle school.
Around that area, you take a test. That test is highly stressful and highly critical to your opportunities as a person. If you score high, you get to finish high school. If you don't score high, nope, we're not spending any money or time on you because the government's like, yeah, we can't. So
that's a Kenya thing, not a Mulli children's
It's
family.
a Kenya thing, but I think Mulli's bound by it, even as in their school, because that's the way the Kenyan government requires everybody has to take these tests. Well, Charles Mulli says, okay, well, if you don't score well, and some people just can't. They don't have the IQ, they don't have the want to, or they're troubled children and they just can't do it. He will invest in the trade school, so then you'll learn how to weld or whatever. They put them in a trade school route so they can at least make a career. So he starts educating them in those fashion. Well, another thing happens, I believe, at the end of your senior year. It's another one of those tests. And it decides whether you even qualify to go on to extra school or not. It's not like in America, if you have the money, we'll let you in. Now, it may change the college you get into based on your grades, but there, you're not even allowed in without it. So Charles has sort of fixed this problem too. So not only does he have his own high school and elementary all the way to high school, not only does he have his own trade schools, he's actually created a Mulli college.
Wow.
Yes, so he has a college that his own kids can go to, and the mothers that come out of his women's program, they get to go there. And he has dorms for them. He has dorms that are good enough for the kids to stay in. He's created an ecosystem.
So going along those things, that type of vocabulary you're using kind of sounds like it's like its own utopia, or maybe they could be like very self-sufficient and kind of they're closed off to their own community. But I've also heard you say that they do a really good job of just loving their neighbors, and it's more than just self-sustaining their own thing. Yes.
Okay, great distinction. I've been chewing on this because when you say the world's largest family, which I guess it is because I don't know who could beat them. I mean, 20-something thousand kids, 30,000. That's a pretty big. They're all adopted. They're all his. They all call him dad and mom. So that's a family. Now, it is a utopia. I've never heard that word used, but yes, it is a closed system of the world's largest family. But the name of it is Mulli Children's Family, and that is an organization that has wings and roots, and that's Charles Mulli saying our neighbors are starving. We have enough food. We're going to give our neighbors food. The neighborhood kids, the school is closed because over there they don't have ISDs like we have in the States. All the parents chip in and they put in money, and you hire a teacher. You pay them $2 a day to teach your kids. And when a community is poor, then your teacher poor, therefore your school poor. By the way, where are you going to meet? who's building that building? So Charles Mully has sort of gone out to the neighborhood and he sponsored schools around, or the neighbors will come and say, will you help us? And so he provides the food for that school. Because some of those kids, they wake up in the morning and if they don't go to school, they don't eat.
Yeah.
So he's supplying their lunch, which may be their only meal of the day. So Charles Mully has made Mully Children's Family creep out into the community. And while I was there, another beautiful thing that they do, because now this is so complex now it's an organization, is people knock on the door, they're starving, there's no water in their rivers, and they come knock on the Mully's door. I forget what they said, how many people knock on that door every day. Can you take my kid? Can I have a job? Like it's a booming ecosystem there. And so they have caseworkers that hear the problems in the community and they'll go out and send a team and they'll find out, oh, the dad broke his leg, the mom is sick or she ran off and now this guy's sitting here with 3 kids and he can't feed them or whatever. And so we went and took food for these families in the community. We prayed with them, we heard their stories, and then we left them food so that they could, and they said with what we dropped off, I think could last like 3 months.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, the neighbors come over too, because when you get blessed like that, you can't take it all to yourself. So when we leave, we sort of see the neighbors walking over to that family because they know they're going to get some food as well. Which, by the way, side thought here, but we also were told that you can tell whether a family is respected in the neighborhood by when we come, do the other neighbors come and stand around or do they not? If they don't, that family is shunned and no one will talk to them. But when the neighbors come around, they know that when we leave, everybody's going to share the food. But your social status matters there, or whether they think you're cursed or blessed or whatever the deal is. It's just very interesting to see the dynamics of a country they have their own culture, they have their own idiosyncrasies and quirks. And it was just very interesting to see that. And we as Americans have a really hard time not putting an American Western lens on other people's problems and thinking we can solve them a certain way. And over there, you have to know the nuances and know the details and know how to solve it. Well, Charles Mully's from there. He's been a street kid. He knows what's going on. He's creating solutions that work within the community, if that makes sense.
It's cool to see like the heart behind how the ministry started, but it's also cool to see the growth, or at least hear about the growth of like how they have just loved their neighbors simply, like kind of what you were saying earlier. Like, yes, they're raising a big family, but at the same time, they're showing their kids how to love well with their neighbors, with,
it's only part of the story.
Yeah,
the kid story is already amazing. To pull kids that, by the way, they never say no. They have a rule. They'll never say no. So if a kid is in need, the mom died last night and there's a toddler sitting in the middle of the slums, they'll call Charles Mully and say, we have a kid. And his answer isn't, I wonder if we can afford it, or where will he sleep? It's go get him. And then you come home and if 2 kids have to sleep on a bunk bed, they have to sleep on a bunk bed. So what's happened is they need dorms. They need things. And so he does have to fundraise, even though he's trying to be self-sustainable. Like they have their own water. They eat the food. They grow the food they eat. But while you're growing food, why not grow extra and sell it?
Yeah.
Right. And so they created chicken farms and they're trying to become sustainable. But at the same time, you never really reach it when you don't say no.
Yeah.
And
always growing.
You're always growing. You're always changing. In Kenya, there's always a flood. There's always a famine. There's always political unrest. And it just creates this never-ending need.
Yeah.
And so as they're growing, they have their pain points of every year of the new problem, new challenge. And so they're always fundraising.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something else that he does that's very interesting. I feel like this falls on ideological lines and political lines about, green earth and, global warming or whatever. But take all that aside. Charles Mully found land that he could use to raise the kids. So he had to sort of go out into the country. And it was dry. It was the desert, if you will. Not like a desert like you and I think about, but it's the high country. It's not a lot out there. He prayed, and he has a great story in the book, and it's in the movie. He literally prayed, like, where am I going to get water? And the Lord said, I'll tell you where to dig. Go dig. And he went and dug in the middle of nowhere. And there was water right there. Everybody told him it wasn't going to be there. He prayed, It's there. He calls it Jacob's Well. It's still the same water that they're doing 20-something years later.
That's cool.
It's a great miracle story. But it was a dry area. And so Charles Mully realized the value of trees and plants. So if you go visit Mully Children's Family, he has you plant a tree. It's just like a symbolic thing of, hey, we're trying to grow greenery here. And you can tell the ecosystem has changed. Like, there are trees. I forget how many millions of trees have been planted in the last 30 years, but you feel like you're in the forest on all the land and the family land.
That's a cool symbolic thing. I like that.
Isn't it cool? But I mean, whether or not it really affects the weather, I don't know, but I've heard stories of, it just has to, right? I mean, like, you know how it is. Like, it happens in urban areas where clouds go over lakes or whatever. Well, they have water and then it creates clouds and it does the trees. Therefore, it has high humidity. Therefore, it rains. Like, you're having a small ecosystem. And whether or not it works perfectly or not, it's still beautiful and it's still amazing. And it gives them fire for the firewood, which the other day when I was there, I don't remember what time of the day it was, but I just saw this kid dragging this stick behind him. And I thought it was cute. I think I took a picture. And then another kid came by with another stick. And then two older teenagers came by with this pretty big, not a log, but a pretty big branch. I mean, they're dragging it. And I've just seen all these kids pull all this stuff. Like, what are they doing? And they're like, oh, it's lunch. Like, they don't have a stove like you and I have. They're collecting firewood every day from the forest, and they take it to the lady cooking so that she can make a fire to make the rice or beans or whatever it is they're having every single day. That's what they do. And imagine about being out of nowhere. Like, that wouldn't even be possible, which is why people sometimes have nothing. They're like, how are we supposed to cook? What are we supposed to eat? How are we supposed to cook it? And where's our water?
Yeah.
And so when in times of drought, they give out water. They create holding ponds. Like, it's a complex, multi-location organization that is trying to feed the family, help the community. They're actually in the middle of building a hospital, but it's not going to be just a hospital for their kids. They're like, we're going to make it a community hospital. And now our kids graduate and become doctors. I think come back and be doctors there, and they'll have a full-time job.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Self-sustaining. And now all the neighbors have a place to go because they have to drive like an hour or so if you get hurt.
Yeah.
And like, I started thinking about that. I have 3 kids. Not that something was always going on, but even with 3 kids, think about your school in your neighborhood, or somebody's always cutting their finger, tripping, skinning their knee, breaking their arm. Well, with 4,000 kids, I don't know the stat to be true. Somebody's got to break their arm every day. Statistically speaking, somebody's got to have a problem every day. And so they have a clinic on site, but imagine what a hospital is going to do for them. It'll save them driving into Nairobi for all the big medical stuff just by having it in their backyard.
Yeah, that's cool.
Pretty complex, right?
Yeah.
So the movie is out. It's free. It's called Mulli. You can go to mcfus.org to watch it or find links to watch it. It's on YouTube. It's on Amazon Prime. It's a great movie. My brother-in-law did not know that I worked with this organization. And one day he called me. He goes, Todd, I just saw this great movie in the theaters, because it was in the theaters a couple of years ago. It was so good. I'm driving home to go get my kids. I'm going to put them in the car. They're going to come kicking and screaming because it's not a movie they think they want to go see, but they need to see it. And sure enough, they both fell in love with it. And he told me about it. I go, yeah, I know who exactly this is. Then my sister, who wasn't there that day, she ended up watching the movie on her own on Amazon and called me. She goes, I just saw this great documentary. I was like, that's the one your husband saw 3 years ago that we told you to watch. And so she goes, this is amazing. Our neighbors right next door, they watched it and they're like, thank you for telling us about it. We watched it with our kids and it was amazing. It's just it's a great story done well. The problem with movies is movies have to have a happy ending. And so the movie is really taking into consideration that Charles Mully is taking kids off the street, loving them, and putting them back out into the community. Like that itself is a story, but it doesn't end with the challenges that happen every single day. Like it's not a happily ever after story. It's a tough story. Kids right now, there's a starving kid right now in Kenya whose mother had just died of AIDS, and they don't have the money to necessarily go grab that kid, but they never say no. And so it's a complex story that's got a lot of growth opportunities and challenges along the way. But the model is so good that people are coming from all around the world and they're watching and studying and seeing what he's doing, and they're trying to emulate his model all in other poor countries as well.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. I mean, not everybody's Charles Mully. So, he's an entrepreneur. God's blessed him clearly. It doesn't mean you can follow his model and it'll work perfectly, but he has a model system. He goes, here's the 5 things that I require, when I build out any program before I say yes to anything. And I want my kids to know this, 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 and this. So he has a system in place. He's probably in his mid to late 70s now. He looks like he's 40. I mean, he's just full of energy, smart man. And his wife is the kindest lady in the world. Her name's Esther, smiles. They used to know, I asked him that. I'm like, when did you quit learning all the people's names? He goes, well, for a long time I knew everybody's name. He goes, now I just can't. There's just so many, and I'm so busy, sort of at the end of his life. He's so busy looking big picture and how's it going to work without him that he's not necessarily in every classroom every day like he probably used to be, right?
Yeah.
And so he said, yeah, there's a time I quit. He goes, and quite frankly, sometimes I go out and somebody will come up to me and say, hey, Dad. And he's like, oh, this must be somebody I raised 25 years ago. I go, I can't remember everybody's name anymore.
So obviously you can watch the movie. You can share the movie. What else can I do to help support?
Yeah, so they have a couple things. Of course, you can always go to mcfus.org to donate. But on that site, you can donate once. You can just become a partner. Like you can just do a monthly donation to just say, hey, I'm here to support your needs. But you can actually support a child. And what's the beauty of supporting a child is it's not that one child's getting a meal and the other guy next to him isn't if he's not supported. It's just you're interacting with the child. You can write that child a letter. They can write you a letter. Like being a sponsored child means that they'll know that someone is looking after them. They're giving money. But listen, I don't want to speak for the ministry in this area because this is not my role there. So I don't know the nuances. But I will say this, what I'm going to say is true. They are very careful not to show favoritism, right? So you cannot have one girl walk around with a pretty dress while somebody else is walking around in a holy T-shirt and like, oh, well, I'm sponsored. You're not. Yeah. So they don't play that game. And I think sometimes people give them shoes. It's like, well, if you got shoes for all of us, we'll take it. But you're not going to do shoes for $2,400, and the other kids don't get to do it. So it's they're giant favoritism that they've abandoned the thought. But here's another reason why. Tribes. We don't think in tribes here in America. We don't even really understand it. Tribes are a giant issue there when it comes to racism or y'all did this to us, therefore we're doing this back to y'all. Political, if the president's out of one tribe and these other tribes feel like they're lesser. And of course there's political unrest, several wars, the whole thing. And Charles Mully has an answer for that. Every color, every language, every gender, every tribe, you're welcome. And we do not talk about tribes. You're not even allowed to talk about it. Of course, they know whose tribes and what because they know their looks and they know your accents. But he squashes it. And so he can't show favoritism because like, oh, well, Charles, you're in this tribe and that kid got that. And so they're just very, very aware that when it comes to child sponsorships, you can't send your child a hat because that's just not fair. Yeah, so it's a communication privilege you get, and you can, like I hang the girl that I sponsor, like I sometimes put her on the refrigerator, I keep her in my desk. I just know that's the girl. I know a little bit about her story. She wrote me a great Christmas card for Christmas, and I actually visited, and here's the other thing too, they didn't let me visit her. And same thing. It's same reason. It's like they don't want somebody to fly over, and this girl gets to come in and have dinner, and they had to go not come dinner. So I was not allowed to go up and meet her and talk to her because they don't want kids to know who's sponsored and who's not visually. Yeah. If that makes sense. There's probably some other reasons too that I'm not in the nuances of, but what was funny is I saw so many kids, and the guy I was with goes, "Hey, did you see the girl you sponsored yesterday?" I'm like, "No." And they go, "Well, she was in the choir." So I did see her. I just didn't know it was her.
Yeah.
Like everybody looked. It was dark. I'm looking at all the smiley faces. I was just in a mood, and I never even thought one of those could be my girl, so I didn't look close enough, right?
Yeah.
I just saw here girls and guys. They were singing. It was amazing. So that's another thing I'd like to talk about real quick before we go is the activities that they do. I mean, they're not always in school every day. So they're really big into sports. They have a choir, amazing. They do karate. They play soccer. And I was talking to the soccer guy because they're actually in their minor league soccer. You know how in America we have major league soccer and then whatever. But there they have all the layers where you can, if you win, you move up to the next league. And if you lose, you're going down. And they're working their way up. They have some really good, talented soccer players. They actually were going to send a couple of long distance runners to the Olympics. And then the COVID happened and something happened. They didn't get to go. But there's some really talent. I mean, think about it. 20,000 kids. Yeah. There's some talent that came out of there. And of course, there's doctors and lawyers. Like there's some real success stories. But even in sports, they're known of having some great programs. And we saw the karate guy while we were there, and the soccer guy, and they're just doing some amazing things. They stay really, really busy. And man, I'm just telling, it's a great story. Like the book Father to the Fatherless, it's a great read. And there may be some other books. I think there's a children's books out for your kids to read and talk about the world's largest family. But I promise you, if you're listening, go to Amazon Prime or go to YouTube, type in Mulli, the movie, and put it in your watch list. And if you don't want to watch it right now, don't. But put it in there, and one day you'll watch it, and you will not regret spending 90 minutes of your life. I call this guy the modern day Mother Teresa. He is special. He is, I use the word anointed loosely, but he is blessed. This man loves the Lord. He tries to follow the Lord, and he's trying to live out Christianity in his best way by loving those who are in need, the widow and the orphan. I mean, that's his whole thing, is the widow and the orphan. That's what he's looking out for. And he's created a whole ecosystem in Kenya that is getting replicated around the world. It's a magnificent story. All right. Thanks for listening today. Xander, thank you for coming. And we will do some more ministry updates and deep dives in future episodes. Blessings.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to follow on TikTok or Instagram for daily stories Christians need to know. Wanting to increase the reach of your ministry or your church's ability to make disciples? Come to my website for free resources and webinars built exclusively for Christian nonprofits and churches. CreativeDigitalGuide.com helps executive directors and pastors learn how to gain ministry partners to do God-sized missions.